Jane Eyre. Jane Eyre, written by Charlotte Brontë, is one of the most famous Victorian novels. She is best known for her novel Jane Eyre. Jane Eyre is the speaker of the novel. She was a poor child from lower class as her father was a poor clergyman. Her mother was left alone by her grandfather as she married a man from lower class. Jane Eyre's parents died because of typhus disease. Before the death of her uncle Reed, he asked a promise from his wife to take care of Jane Eyre as her own child. But she violated that promise. Jane was not treated equally as her cousins. Jane is the protagonist of the novel. She is an orphan and she is living with her aunt, Mrs. Reed, and her children, John, Eliza, and Georgiana. In front of them, she is powerless and she has inferiority complex. When Mrs. Reed and her children are gathered in the drawing room, Jane is not invited there. Her real life is unhappy, but she is living in her imaginary world. She likes to read books. Jane accesses the imaginary world through the books because she was unable to face the reality. Her real life is so hard and unhappy. Eyre is reading a book called Bewick's History of British Birds. Here, birds are a symbol of freedom. Jane longs for her freedom from Gateshead, where she is oppressed by the family. Jane feels fear towards her cousins. John expects respect from Jane. Regularly, she undergoes punishments and abused by the family. She is also injured by John. Because of the punishments, Jane lost her endurance and patience. She is not resilient against them. They abuses her physically and verbally. Apart from these abuses, Jane is passionate about her education. Her life at Gateshead is terrible. Jane is agonizing and she is the victim. She is in a vulnerable situation. Mrs. Reed is portrayed as an authoritative and irresponsible woman. She is cruel and supports the brutal behaviors of her children. She denigrates Jane Eyre and her parents. She never offers little happiness to Jane, but punishes persistently. Mrs. Reed is a figure of injustice, and she is the main antagonist of the novel. She always neglects Jane and hates her. Whenever she is angry towards Jane, she sends and shuts her in Red Room. Red Room in the novel, Jane Eyre symbolizes terrifying nature. It also symbolizes prison. Red Room is where Mr. Reed died. Aunt Mrs. Reed creates fear to Jane as she believed there was a ghost. Jane feels panic and nervous inside the Red Room. She is wretched because of these unfortunate incidents. She is tortured in the Red Room. Here, the novel speaks about myth. The one who supports and stands with Jane is Bessie. She is the one who cares for her and she is kind and offers love towards Jane. Bessie is shown as a good friend of Jane. When Jane is bleeding and unconscious, Bessie takes care of her and also she speaks on behalf of Jane to Mrs. Reed. Bessie nurses Jane well as she is a good friend in need. Although she supports Jane, she advises her to be obedient. Busy is portrayed as a punctual servant, as punctuality is one of the rule for servants. But she is good natured and sweet. Busy is an inconsistent character as her feelings for Jane changes throughout the novel. The character, Mr. Lloyd, brings a turning point in Jane Eyre's life. He inquires about Jane's relatives. He is portrayed as a well wisher and guide for Jane. He is always kind to Jane and treats her well. Jane's conversation with Lloyd is a great chance to reveal all her worries. As Jane thinks about the education, he suggests her to study. This was Jane's new beginnings in her life. Lloyd opens up and assists Jane to study further, where he thinks that she would be happy there. Social class is an important theme in Jane Eyre. All the events happen against a background of social class. Social class discrimination is expressed because Jane Eyre belonged to lower class, where Aunt Reed and her children belong to upper class. Male dominated ideology is explained from John harassing Jane. Oppression is conveyed through the novel as Jane Eyre struggles continually to achieve equality and to overcome oppression. There is a patriarchal domination in the novel. The novel expresses the trust in significance of last wish. The novel also speaks about dependency, where Jane is dependent in her childhood. Her feelings and emotions are restricted at Gateshead. The overall novel explores the journey of Jane finding her true self.
Jane Eyre is a novel by the English writer Charles Brontë. The novel's narrator and protagonist. Gateshead is Jane Eyre's first important setting. Jane loses her parents at an early age and is raised by her aunt, Mrs. Reed, who is the wife of Jane's uncle. Gateshead is the home where the Reed family lives. At Gateshead, Jane Eyre does not have a loving childhood, but she does start to grow up to be the patient, fierce, and determined young woman she will be for the rest of the text. When Reed children were in the drawing room, she was not invited there. Her real life was unhappy, but she is living in her imaginary world. Also, she likes to read books. She approaches imaginary world through the books. She was unable to face the reality of her life. Jane is physically and emotionally abused at Gateshead. Most horribly, she is attacked by John Reed, and when she attempts to resist, she is punished. She was excited that she is going to live a new life. Jane's grandfather had dis- disinherited her, so she didn't want to live there with her aunt and others. So she was protected by the servant Bessie. She is reading a book called Bewick's History of British Birds. Birds are symbol of freedom, so she is happy in her own world. When Jane was bleeding and unconscious, Bessie took care of her and speaks on behalf of Jane to Mrs. Reed. But even she advises her to be obedient. Jane is organizing and she is the victim. She was in a vulnerable situation. Red Room is where Mr. Reed died. John was shut there was a punishment. They created fear to her as she believed there was a ghost. She was panicked and nervous. Jane suffers a lot in that room. Here, innocence of the child is expressed. She is breached because of these unfortunate incidents. But Messi nurses Jane well. She was a good friend of Jane in need. She was a punctual servant as punctuality is one of the rule of servants. Taking the Lloyd, was a great chance to reveal the worries the child thinks about the education. Lloyd suggests her to study. The writer uses unique feelings of the child. He also uses psychological condition through the nature. Because of the punishments, Jane lost her endurance. Jane was oppressed by her cousin John. She was not resilient about them. This relationship allows Jane to understand the importance of having a true friendship. The novel speaks about Jane's freedom, dependency, myths, and social class discrimination.
Jane Eyre, this novel was written by Charlotte Brontë. An author's name was given as a Carabel and it was first published in 1847. This novel speaks about Jane Eyre's life. She is an open girl. Jane Eyre does not have parents. She lived with her aunt. She is treated differently by her aunt. According to this novel, the Reed's children gathered around their mother in the drawing room. Mrs. Reed was very happy with her children, but Jane wasn't invited to join them. That means Jane wasn't considered as one of their own children. It may be hurtful thing to her. When she asked about that, Mrs. Reed pointed out that she is not an obedient girl like Reed's children. When she went to the room, John called her and abused her boy. So Jane was psychologically disturbed. He asked her to call him as Master's Reed. This clearly explained how he treated that small girl. Even from their conversation, the upper class children expect respect. They do not mingle with other class people. Also, they do not give any respect to them as well. So he really hated Jane. Jane regularly undergoes difficulties in the family. Children from upper class people abuse lower class children like that. Jane's also abused by John. Mother is a person who takes care all the responsibilities towards their children. It means the mother is a main role in the society. But Mrs. Reed doesn't do anything like that. She never care about her children's wrongdoing and she never say any word towards her children. If they do know any bad thing, she does not take into consideration about her son, even though he abused her. That is affected Jane's life badly, thus verbally and physically. John harassed her with that he differentiate that 10 years girl. John always do fight with Jane. This is what much hard her when they start to fight, Jane address him by someone such as wicked, cruel boy, murder, and slave drive. The way he addressed him, it clearly points but how he behaved a bit in the past. She was injured by the John, so she fell unconscious as well. Jane Eyre shows her resilience towards him. John but uses his physical force in order to abuse her verbal and physical. The mother of John always and believes what her son says doesn't even give any opportunities to clarify. Jane said even though Jane is a racial relation to Mrs. Reed, she hates her and doesn't give any respect and rights to John. When someone does something wrong, they have to get punishment. It is a common thing, but when it comes to Jane, it happens against the punishment should be given to John, but it is given to the victim. In the upper class English society, we can see there are servants who do all the works in their home. Similarly, Mrs. Reed also has some servant in her home. Even after the unconscious, the servant to Jane to the red room where Mrs. Reed and locked her inside. When she got up, she realized that she was in the red room. She got much fear. Because of her nervous system has shaken even the servant also don't go to that red room in the right. After knowing this thought there was a ghost. Because of the fear, Jane fell ill. Aunt always discriminated her even though their children do anything. Elisa is one of the daughter whose willful and selfish Georgina has a spiteful temper. The John always do what her prefer, but whatever they do, They always remain as darling of her. Reed family does operation towards Jane, even though she is a little girl. When she fights against John the servant, thinks she should be silent and give respect to Reed's family. But even after facing a lots of difficulties, how can she remain silent? That's why she fights against oppression. But servant advised her, if you continuously do like this, you have no one to care. So you will go to the orphanage house. The novel speaks about dependence as well. The Reed's family has kinds of make dominating ideology, so she was treated as injustice. She never got kind from them. She has an agonism feeling within her heart because of that family. When she feel like this, she remember her uncle who took her to his house when her parent died. But he also died when she was 1 year old. But now she thinks if the uncle alive, she doesn't want to undergo these types of injustice. Uncle is the brother of her mother, so she strongly believed that he would have take care of her if he alive. This poem speaks about myth as well. That means after the death scenario, when a person die, that person revisit the world, especially when that person's last wish doesn't fulfill. So she thinks the spirit of her uncle must be around her. When her uncle died, he asked a promise from his wife that she wants to take care Jane's life. Her own children, but she doesn't even fulfill that. She violated the promise which is taken by Mrs. Reed. The writer reflects the natural occurrences such as wind, cool, moonlight, and etc. After she was fear because of the darkness, she thinks there is ghost of her uncle. Here, feeling of the children expressed in the red room, she has no people with her. The lights encountered her. Her nervous system was badly shaken. Bessie was one of the servants who worked in the Reeds, but she is not others. She has a kind-hearted, so she is the one who always helps to John. When John screamed, Bessie was the one requested to the Mrs. Reed in order to release to her because of kind attitude of her. When Bessie asked like that, Mrs. Reed ordered something to follow Jane. As soon as Jane heard that, she said to her, "Oh, auntie, have pity." In this line, innocent of the child, powerless of the child is expressed here. Jane suffers beyond her capacity. She suffers more than what she can. After the red room incident, she got much fear because of that. She fell sick. In that time, Bessie nurses her very well. She acts a friend in need and she takes care of her very well. That time her life becomes as vigilant. It brings silence and tear from her eyes. Earlier, she was much interested reading books. So she took John's book in order to read, but even after all confidence and interest as well. She feels she is miserable, but the truth is isn't miserable. The families of Reed made her like that. After falling sick, Dr. Lloyd was invited in order to treat her. He continuously asked her about the incident, which made her to fall sick. But as a servant, Bessie tried to cover up the incident. At the moment, doctor felt something mysterious when the bell had rung. Doctor said to Bessie, went after that doctor started to ask questions. At last, she started to express all her feeling to the doctor. She has all the burden with her heart. It's the one chance to reveal. She clearly said all the incident which she faced until now. Doctor consoled her and asked her about education. No one asked anything about that her because no one cares about her. She got excited and replied the students can sing but they prefer they could translate the book if like that. From this writer expresses the unique thought of child, even though she does not have freedom. She beautifully imagines with a limited information which is hard from other children of read. After hearing this, the doctor asked to join the school. John happily thinks that It's the entrance to a new life by separating from the Reed's family, and also doctor suggests it with Mrs. Reed. But she accepts it happily because she has things chance to get rid of her. That time, Joan remember, her family when a child listen about her parents about their death. It gives grief too. They at the moment she got to know about their death. Her father was very kind-hearted person. So he always used to visit sick people. When she visited, he got infected with the disease and it spread to her mother as well.